I need to hang it up. But I want to finish Jesus' sentence. When he says that you shall love your neighbor as yourself, last week we talked about what it means to love ourselves because God makes us royal. We are simultaneously royalty. You all see crowns on your heads? Not halos, but crowns. You are simultaneously royalty and you are loyal subjects of the one true sovereign, the one true king. Right? And so we love as we have been loved. We recognize in ourselves somebody Jesus thought was worth dying to save. But we also recognize that with that royalty comes responsibility. James, it's interesting, in James 2:8, he says, you really fulfill the royal law. You do well if you fulfill the royal law. And you know what he says the royal law is? You shall love your neighbor as yourself. It's a royal law. It's the king's mandate. It's our job description. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so if you want to see somebody do something royal, have them serve their neighbors at the soup kitchen. If you want to make yourself look regal, then rake your elderly neighbor's yard. If you want to ascend to a throne in Jesus' kingdom, kneel down and wash somebody's feet. If you want to make a name for yourself in the kingdom of Christ, then help teach some children to read. Now, I know that a lot of this is preaching to the choir. I know that a lot of y'all are saying, my list is already pretty long. I mean, I'm doing okay. And so I would remind us that we are all surrounded by circles of care. And in different seasons, the circles of our care expand and contract. And it may be that you're in a season of a pretty tight circle. Maybe because your abilities are limited, or maybe because you're working hard 60 hours outside the home, and the time you spend loving your children is the time that is the circle that you can care for. And God gets that. God understands that the royal law is fulfilled in different seasons. The circles expand or the circles contract. But we do believe that in due season God can expand the circles of those we are able to love. Maybe it comes at retirement, or maybe it comes at a time when children leave the home, or maybe it comes when our life circumstance changes in some significant way. But I'm convinced of this, that the royal mandate of loving our neighbor is fulfilled in a way that's almost like the way farmers plant in a field. I was touched and moved, and I guess just my mind was changed about something when I went to the Holy Land, and there was a farmer sowing seed in a field, and the guide told us that every year the farmer marked the farthest point in the field where he or she was able to achieve growth. And every year the farmer, in hope, threw seeds just beyond that marker, hoping that some part of that soil that hadn't been fertile the year before would become fertile. And so we are given opportunities at different seasons in our lives to expand the circles of our concern and care. And then we are, at different times, privileged to receive care from wider and wider circles. One of the things that I have experienced in my situation in the last 6 months has been that the circle of care has been enormously large. And I've been overwhelmed by the number of people who have lifted me in prayer, or who have offered kindness that we did not anticipate. So, we press on. We press on, as Paul said, towards a goal that is heavenly, that is royal, because the people we dwell near, they're royalty. Did you see the kids here yesterday dressed up in all those Halloween outfits? I didn't see a lot of, well, there were some princesses. And there were some princes, but every one of them was royalty. Every one of them was just a little lower than God. Every one of them has been crowned with glory and honor, and it may just be you or me who reveals that crown to them on their head. I close with a story that's not mine. And I'm going to repeat it to you just the way it was told to me. And then we're going to spend the time, if you wish to be anointed, offering that opportunity to you. It's a story, so I'm going to read it. Once upon a recent time, in a tiny church village in the north of Europe, as the parishioners gathered for Sunday worship, an elderly man was seen among them. He looked quite distinguished, well-groomed, a man who would have blended in well with any crowd of churchgoers in almost any place. Well, the well-groomed part, I don't know. Except for the fact that in this tiny place he was a stranger. He was no stranger to church worship, however. He made his way into the warm darkness of the church, pausing a moment to accustom his eyes to the light, and then made his way to an empty pew for a few moments of quiet contemplation before the service began. He removed his gloves, set them carefully inside the hat, which he had of course removed upon entering through the ancient oak doors, placed his elegant silver-topped cane carefully next to them so it should not fall and shatter the fragrant silence, and he gave himself over to the musings of his heart. Then she arrived. We have all met her in one form or another. The matriarchal figure of a woman in charge of the world, or at least in charge of her world, hatted and gloved, befurred and befeathered, she did not walk so much as make stately progress through the courtyard in front of the church, reminding one observer of a large ship moving on a determined course. After pleasantries with a few other parishioners and an eagle eye cast quickly around to ensure that all was as it should be, she made her way into the church. There in the soft radiance of the candles is the man, the visitor, the stranger. With the air of one born to privilege, the manner approved by the finest finishing schools, and a couple of imperious taps of a fine silver-handled cane, she manages to break the reverie of the stranger. "You, sir, are in my pew." The old gentleman, surprised by the interruption, looked up into the face of the woman. Wordlessly, but with an inexplicable twinkle in his eye, he collected his belongings, gloves, hat, and his own fine silver-topped cane. Also one of polished manners, he stood to his full height, bowed ever so slightly in a mixture of courtesy and apology, and moved to another unoccupied pew, leaving the queenly matron unchallenged in her domain. The service went as all services did at that tiny church, and at the conclusion the gentleman again collected his cane, slid his gloves over his long, well-manicured fingers, and as he stepped into the soft pearl-gray light of the cloudy day, made his way toward the gate of the courtyard. He paused at the gate and turned to look back at the knots of parishioners taking leave of each other, managed to catch the notice of the woman who had rebuffed him. With practiced grace and accustomed ease and the same inexplicable twinkle, he tipped his expensive hat to her and then made his way down the street and vanished around a corner. It was well into the week following when the matron, holding forth on one of the many subjects upon which she was strongly opinionated, was interrupted by another lady of a certain age. "Did you see who was in church here last Sunday?" "Everyone who ought to have been there," she said, "of course, and oh, some strange man." Her face turned a shade of purple rarely seen in that conservative little village when the other lady spoke up. "That was no strange man. That was King Christian of Denmark." The very man, the head of one of the oldest and most enduring European monarchies, whom had he come to her house, she would have entertained with her finest damask and most refined manners, she had thrown out of her church pew. And so the story closes with this question: where will the king come? Unbidden and unidentified to you. Where will the royal one show himself or herself? And how will we, as those who are called to follow the royal law, as those who are called to be a royal priesthood, a holy people, how will we respond? Will we love our neighbor? Or will we say, that seat's taken? One of the things about being royalty is that royalty is designated by anointing, by oil poured or put on the head of the royal one as a sign of God's designation of that person as royalty. This morning we have oil of gladness that is scented with frankincense and myrrh. It's a lovely fragrance, and it reminds me of the passage in 2 Corinthians where we are told to be the fragrance of Christ spreading into the world. So you are not only royal, but you're smelly. If you wish, as we sing, "Make me a servant," as the words appear on the screen, if you wish to offer yourself to be anointed, you may do so at your seat. If you hold your hands out like this, I will come to your seat. If you come forward, the anointing oil will be offered. It is not something you must do. It is something you are able to do as God leads you. And as we sing together, "Make me a servant."